Please raise your hands if you've got any questions for the panel. We'll try and think about anything that you've heard today. It might be a situation in your workplace that you want to open up and sort of question about, or share a particular story within your own workplace. But if you can raise your hand, we'll get one of the mics over to you. One at a time, please. One at a time. Come on, don't be shy now. Thank you, sir. Thank you. No running, thanks. And are the mics on the table activated?
It's probably a question to the whole panel. You get a person that has finally got up the gumption to seek help, report something. They have been enduring this for quite some time. Have they been recording it? No. How much of a burden of proof is now required for this sort of anti-bullying to be effective? Right? We've got the person up there to say that they have been bullied, but now they're told we can't do anything until you've got some actual proof. Can you tell us your views on this part of the action incident? What people, encouraging people to actually come forward, but what do they need to be able to, for it to be effective? Thank you.
I'm happy to start. A couple of comments. One, coming forward works when there's someone that can be trusted who will take responsible action to act on the complaint that they've received. So it very much depends on the work culture. People need to feel safe to report to someone who's got some power, like a HR manager or a senior colleague or a trusted colleague, and that person has to take action. Then the bullying can be resolved normally pretty quickly, otherwise it persists. Second comment is the approach that's taken often is this adversarial one that you're talking about to prove that something's happened and what's the burden of proof. And I think it would be more successful to shift to a model which is a learning-based approach, where bullying is a symptom of the underlying functioning. What is this telling us? What do we need to learn about our organisation to change? Again, that requires good willingness and good systems and a want to change. I don't know a lot specifically around the burden of proof. Any of our other panel members have some experience on that?
Diary.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, obviously a diary. Witnesses, obviously, again. But then you put yourself in a situation too that if management is in the right area, if they don't know what to do or they don't want to know what to do, nothing will get done, and it could get worse. Excuse me. I've said to a lot of people that are having a problem and they can see a light at the end of the tunnel going elsewhere. Sometimes your mental health is more important than sticking with that job, even if it's awkward. But you know, there is times when you just can't walk out. You've got a responsibility. You've got a family, a wage, and all that sort of stuff. And if you're in the country, it's even harder again. So it's a hard thing. But one thing we always say to younger people, and I think it doesn't matter how old you are, conversation. Talk to someone that you can trust. And if only, and I'll put it this way, if only Brodie had spoken to us, her brothers, or someone that knew what to do, we wouldn't be here today. And that's what it's about. Finding
boss who cared about the whole workplace and what was going on.
Take it out the back, because he didn't want to see the punters seeing what was going on.
Those attitudes have to stop. There's no such thing as that. We've just got to all look out for each other, and management really do need to listen. It's all about relating to people. You know, you can have be the best man in the world with skills on it, but you have to have people skills. You have to learn to listen to the people that are talking to you about these sort of things. There was nothing there, as I said, for Brodie. There was no policies, nothing there. So the attitude was take it out the back. And that does still happen in a lot of, not necessarily the big ones, but a lot of the younger tradies where there might be only 1 or 2 apprentices. Some of these things that go on are just... And they say, I don't want to say anything because I might lose my job. This is the sort of thing they think about, and that's wrong. They should feel safe to be able to speak up, and that's what we try and promote. That, yeah, if I do say something, I will be taken seriously, and something will be done about it. Because if you nip it in the bud early, it's going to be a lot easier for everyone. This might save someone's life too.
Well, that's the bottom line, isn't it, when you talk about life?
Just something that I would add to that, and it won't address the question that you asked about burden of proof, but it is about providing support regardless of cause. Because the person that's coming to you has been affected by the behaviour that they've experienced in some way. And so they should be your focus. What support do they need? What do they need directed towards them at this time? And if they can't substantiate all of the things that have happened to them, it's possible that it's because there's a whole lot of little things, and we see this a bit in bullying as well. Well, it was just this thing, and it was that thing, and it was this, and they all look really inconsequential. And if I came up with that, then people would laugh at me and go, well, toughen up. But if we look at the individual and how it's impacted on them, and we provide supports to that person, not so that they can fix the workplace, because that's still the job of the organisation and management, but so that we can actually make sure they're in a safe place and that they're getting the supports to work through how this is all affecting them.
So just coming full circle back to the question, if it is the target we're talking about here, seeking out the support is a good way of documenting the health and safety impact. So under the legislation, it's repeated unreasonable behaviour that creates a risk to health and safety. So targets should always be encouraged to go and seek out that support. It will help get some documentation, and it will make sure that their mental health is protected and supported. So a diary, contact with supports, and talking to people in the workplace that they trust.
I might just add to that as well, if I may. Also, bringing it to the people within your organisation that's actually got some responsibility, and keeping a record of that as well, so that you can demonstrate that you're not just trying to deal with it alone, you are trying to raise it with a view to get it resolved. Now, I'm assuming that you're thinking, if a matter came to the regulator, what would we be asking for? So yes, we would be looking for evidence that the matter has been recorded. Witnesses are a wonderful thing if they're willing to share information, and quite often, I'm sure you can understand witnesses aren't always willing to share. But raising it formally, using your own internal conflict and resolution procedures, if you have those in place, so that you can demonstrate that you've took reasonable steps to try and bring this to the attention to those with responsibility. Okay, there was a flurry of hands further at the back of the room, and you've all put them down now. So is there anybody else that's got any questions? Thank you.
Yeah, I've got a question about the tone at the top. What are the suggestions for the tone from the top, and what to do if the top is where the problem is, and so the grievance policies are not effective? You might have them, but any suggestions then?
Yeah, the right tone at the top is absolutely vital, and all my research will support that, but that's one of the most trickiest problems to solve. Organisations react to their external drivers. So here's an example from what they do in hospitals in the UK. They actually make workplace bullying one of the 14 measures that hospitals are evaluated on. Can you imagine, as soon as they did that, the bullying rates actually declined because it started to become an issue that people cared about addressing because of the external levers that were applied. I think it's pretty hard to change the top layer of an organisation without some external levers, and it's really difficult to get that culture change.
something that I might just add to that is in the work that we do with organisations and industry associations and their member organisations, is that when there is buy-in at the top for creating a mentally healthy workplace and the senior executive team are on board with it, then the improvement that that organisation makes is greater and more fully sustained for longer than if it is an individual within an organisation who has a passion about it and tries to champion it from within. Because we see then that while there is some activity that happens at that level in that organisation, it often lasts for as long as that person stays. And we've been able to then notice that when that person has left, that there's some activity happening over here, and why is that? Well, it's because of that individual. But if it happens at that senior executive level, in terms of creating a mentally healthy workplace, then that's much stronger sustained and much better, and then that flow down and flow up effect and all across the organisation has greater impact.
Another initiative that I'm aware of, and this might not work if the problem's at the very top, but within the more middle layers of management, is to make behaviour and conduct 50% of the performance appraisal. So it's not just what you can achieve in relation to your core work objectives or being on budget, but it's the way you do it. And big organisations like BAE Systems have trialled that sort of thing, not exactly in response to bullying, but in relation to other behavioural problems, and it's been successful. So I think, when you embed good behaviour as part of what we recognise and reward, it changes the culture from the bottom up.
Just in regard to your earlier comments regarding bystanders, I think part of the issue, and I know of a person who in their normal life is very kind, etc. She was in a situation where she was being bullied at work, and when the focus turned away from her and they then started bullying a new employee. She was quite upset, but she never said anything. She used to come home in tears at the treatment this person was getting, but never said anything because there was a bit of, at least it's not me, sort of attitude. In a work environment like that, what would you suggest would be the sort of phase one, the very first step that you could do to try to, when it is so rampant and cultural, what would be your very first step that you would give advice to someone in that position to change?
I think it goes back to what I said before. Your health is more important than the job. And yes, you can go into it and report it and so forth, but as you said, it'd come back to her regardless. What do you do about the bully? But what you'll find a lot of people will do will leave that job.
That's wrong for someone.
Yeah, because someone else, like you just said, that other person is now receiving because they prefer that person.
Yeah, just to give a bit more information. So she did leave that position. She moved on because she couldn't sustain the culture within that workplace, I suppose. But still felt really bad about it because she knew what she was leaving behind. She knew, the culture would continue.
Well, that's the problem. Someone else will come in and the same
That's
sort of
right.
thing will happen because the culture just hasn't changed. And I know that's exactly how she feels because a lot of people do feel like that. They don't want to say anything because even some people think they're being a troublemaker if they're but it's not. We really do need to look out for each other, and that's why we have to feel safe within a workplace to be able to report workplace bullying and know that something will be done about it. As I said, we talked about in Brodie's case, the attitude was out the back, and there was bystanders there, and I know I've spoken to them after Brodie's death, and they said how bad they felt that they really couldn't do more. Some of them actually left and didn't know until Brodie had passed away what had happened. And they said, I really wish we'd said something. But even if they had, at the particular time, there was nothing there for them to do because their attitudes, that culture of that place was a toxic environment. And some places are like that. And we do get young apprentices that will leave one apprenticeship they've had bad experiences, they'll move to another one and it can be really positive for them. But they know that it's still probably going on. There are some people, as far as I'm concerned, shouldn't have people employed with them because they just don't know how to look after their people.
There is another way too, that, you know, if it was properly done, that if I'm talking about apprentices for one, you've got to start somewhere, that there's a system put in place that with apprentices, that there's a 1 to 10 basis of going to that particular place to work, and all those, if you want to call it just basic stuff, ticking 10 boxes to make sure that that place is a safe environment to work for. And they have all those different things in place to look after their workers, safety and so forth. That's something that, I know that's a basic way of putting it, but that's something that we're trying to do in Victoria with proposals that we're hoping to do next year, depending on who gets into government. So, is that helping in a sense?
I suppose it does. The question, I suppose, was
I know what you were talking
besides
about,
leaving the workplace, you know, is there a first step you can take? Like if you were to go to Fair Work or Safe Work SA and say, look, come in, check this place out. I've really got no evidence other than, and then you've got the whole fear culture that existed within that company as well, that they don't want to talk bad about the company because they know, you know, for example, Safe Work will come in, they'll do their investigation and leave, but after that, if you've spoken about them, you know, you'll be the next target.
Initiatives regardless of talking about names?
Yeah, so with the health and safety regulator, and I would imagine this is the same across all jurisdictions, you can lodge the issues with Safe Work SA in order to look into a matter. If a person's left the agency, what it would be is that the regulator would look at what policies, procedures and how things are actually addressed within a workplace. Quite often we hear, and I'm not saying that this is taken as the gospel, but quite often we hear, oh, we didn't know about that. We didn't realise this was an issue. We take that with a grain of salt, of course, but what we're trying to find, first of all, is that there's a mechanism within a workplace in order to raise issues and that they can be dealt with by the relevant responsible person. Obviously, quite often the person that's been on the receiving end of bullying quite often wants something or some action to be taken that is quite often beyond what we can actually prove. So that's where the frustration comes in for the individual. So we're limited by the laws in which we can apply the burden of proof, as we spoke about earlier, as to how we actually apply those laws. But quite often it's all about looking at the system. If there's evidence or if there's people coming forward to say they're happy to speak, well then obviously the investigation expands in order to get statements from those individuals. But when somebody's left the agency, we often get notifications, and that's probably the most common form of complaint that we have lodged with us once they've left the organisation. I think in some cases for the individual it's a way of them letting somebody know about what they've experienced, and I encourage that because quite often it's a burden for them to then carry on knowing that that problem still exists.
I mean, it's not a perfect system. It's very difficult to address bullying. For an individual, though, go and seek support yourself. Encourage them to seek support. Now, again, that's part of the documentation trail if needed, but it also helps you step back and make a wise choice by talking to a mental health professional about the situation you're in. I think leaving, as we've mentioned, is a good step. Your health is more important. And then there's the advice lines. There's a heads up, which I will allow Catherine to mention. There's the regulators have websites, so it's getting information, becoming armed with different strategies that you can take. So support and documentation and information, I think, are the first steps to go.
And I was just going to add another comment in relation to support. Before you mentioned that the first person who experienced bullying had left the organisation, I was going to suggest that if it was a case of, well, it's always just the new person who gets bullied, and if the person who then isn't experiencing it anymore and takes a little sigh of relief thinking, oh goodness, glad it's not me, then perhaps they can offer support to that new person and reach out to them and indicate that, well, this has happened to me and this is how I've experienced it. And therefore, they're actually creating connection, and perhaps together they can take some action or take some steps, and then they might actually find that there's several of them in the workplace. So maybe they can provide support to each other if they don't feel powerful or they feel powerless to actually influence the organisation.
Thank you. We've probably just got time for one more question. I did see a hand go up over here, the lady in the white blouse. Sorry. We'll slip in two then. How's that? I'm caring and sharing.
Thank you. I acknowledge both your points, Catherine, in terms of, yes, we've got to support the individual, but I also take the point that it is in this state about burden of proof. So I heard you say before that you guys are going to be talking to Rob Lucas. What can we specifically do to assist in getting the laws in this state changed so that we can get something like a Brodie's Law in South Australia and stop the people, the victims, going through what they're going through, having to leave a job just to protect their mental health? We can certainly work at another level in changing organisational cultures. We can put into place appropriate policies and procedures and top-down and all of that. But there will always be some people that continue with this practice, and there needs to be a way to hold people accountable for their actions. So specifically, what can we, as people that are obviously interested in this area, do to support the change of the law?
Complain. Now that's the number one, obviously, to the politicians, and whatever else you think you can do, put something together to represent what you're trying to fight for. Get someone that actually has been through a trauma, perhaps, and go with those people and start a movement, if you want to call it that. Put it this way, if we hadn't have got, well, we got the actual law changed in Victoria, but if we had have just said, right, it's changed and walk away, nothing would have happened. We've had to get out there and push and push and push, and we're still pushing 11 years later. And yes, there is a lot of people in Victoria that know it, a lot of companies know about it, and that's not just in Victoria either. But all we ever get help from is WorkSafe Victoria. Education department won't touch us, and we've tried and tried. The police sort of blind eye to some things that we do. It's not easy, but we will never, ever give up. And I think the more you talk about it, the more people you can get involved. That's what it's about. People power, it's a basic way of putting it, but that's the truth. Politicians actually listen to you when they're getting voted. Or as a good majority of people want changes, and you put it in their face.
And I guess today when we go to see Rob Lucas, we will be talking about how the law does work in Victoria. It does send a clear message. It's not the fact of putting people in jail, but there is a line there. If you're going to get into this sort of behaviour and someone takes their own life and that, then yeah, you're going to be held accountable for it. And that's why I think it's a very important law. As you said, there's all these things that go on and trying to prove things that, but one life surely is worth changing this law for. It's just, has to be there. It's just like the road law or any other law. We just need it there and need to take it serious. I think sometimes people take bullying as just, it's not. It's a very serious issue and it has a lot of, consequences to it.
But campaigns, definitely, getting out there, people seeing you, listening to you, particularly like this, it encourages other people, like 20 people out of here today walk away and do something totally positive. Go up in Parliament and say, why aren't we changing it? Why aren't we doing this? Put them in the right place. And who are the worst bullies?
Politicians.
Bingo.
Just have to watch
They get
them.
away with it.
I know. That's when you're talking about starting at the top. Well,
I know we haven't got
they
much
need
time,
to look.
but when we put the actual law through, we were in the House of Representatives, right? Not Representatives, the upper house. And when Brodie's Law came in, prior to that, they were all yelling and mucking around with each other. You could drop a pin. Everyone had a talk. Everyone was on the same page, no matter what side of the fence you were. That's a simple way of putting it.
Thank you. And just that one last quick question. Never give up.
My question was, what if the HR manager is a psychopath and a bully at the same time?
Go to another country.
I think there's always, well, there's not always, but there's always another layer potentially above. If there isn't, there's the external authorities that you can raise this with. You might not always get the action that you want, but by addressing it, by having it recorded, by having it addressed by another authority, might just be the thing that starts a bit of a change in the workplace. Thank you again to our panel. It's been great having you over, and look, Damien and Ray are actually here till tomorrow, so they're going to be hanging around for the rest of the day, so please take the opportunity to speak with them. They've gone through an incredible journey themselves, and I'm sure they've got plenty more that they can share with you in some of the breaks for the rest of this day. So please again extend our thanks to Catherine, to Michelle,